Review copy provided by Sony. Returnal is a study in masterful contradictions. Defense balanced with aggression, buffs weighed against debuffs, permanent progression versus roguelike destruction. It's a game of brutal punishment that leads to euphoric release. The constant interpenetration of these opposite forces is core to what makes Returnal such a phenomenal experience. Developer Housemarque have stepped out of their top-down bullet hell arcade comfort zone, but they haven't really. Despite the shiny layers of polished story and upped production value, this is vintage Housemarque through and through. That profound dialogue between Housemarque's past, present, and future has led to one of its finest moments. It's a challenging, fast-paced bullet hell that demands precision and mastery, but it's also something new for the Finnish developer, a big, blockbuster production with an emphasis on organic storytelling. Returnal bridges the gap between those two approaches, but it leans more into the former's arcadey, one-more-coin nature. It's not for the gun-shy. This game will test you with its eye-watering difficulty and slap you down over and over. You're watching the Spiel Times review of Returnal. It's out April 30th exclusively for PlayStation 5. This is a spoiler-free review. Returnal is a fascinating tapestry of interlocking systems. There's the artifacts, the game's vast array of buffs that provide main character Celine with bonuses for each run. There's parasites, a group of alien life forms that latch on to Celine's spacesuit and provide a benefit like a larger health bar while weakening her in other ways, like reducing the effect of upgrades. There's even permanent upgrades that allow her to access new parts of the map on subsequent runs. If you don't know what I mean by runs, you might not be aware of Returnal's roguelike aspect. After each death, the player has to restart from the beginning. The health bar resets, the artifacts disappear, the parasites detach. Only certain infrequent permanent upgrades carry over from one run to the next. Returnal is more generous with its roguelike elements than many within the genre, as it does allow players to warp between levels without repeating bosses as long as they explore the initial areas for long enough to find a travel room. While it's sure to be compared to the genre's recent breakout hit Hades, I kept thinking of Risk of Rain 2, another sci-fi roguelike third-person shooter with a similar conceit and sense of momentum. It's not necessary to entirely clear an area again after death, which makes sense considering how sprawling and lengthy each of Returnal's 6 biome levels are. Each individual biome takes longer to clear than many other roguelikes' entire maps, so it makes sense to mitigate the frustration inherent to having to start back at the beginning with reasonable shortcuts. Returnal's areas, while random in their order and specific configuration, always feel handcrafted, never evoking the procedural aimlessness that plagues some roguelike level design. The core of any good roguelike is the plethora of satisfying and diverse builds that make each run feel special, and Returnal completely nails that. There's an eye-watering number of artifacts, parasites, and weapons that allow each build to blossom into something tantalizing and dangerous. Celine is constantly tempted by powerful upgrades that also impart huge drawbacks. Is it worth boosting my health while slashing my damage output? Should I increase the level of my upgrades at the expense of more dangerous enemies? These are the type of questions that animate Returnal, that make discovering new items more than just a mindless grab for each one you see. There are risks and rewards that have to be balanced with each build, and that feedback loop of discovery and knowledge is remarkably well balanced across the 20 to 30 hours it'll take most players to hit the credits. Some upgrades may not feel right for a particular build's approach, but they rarely feel useless or overpowered. It would be easy for those supplementary mechanics to be smothered by a weak foundation. Luckily, Housemarque seemed to understand that perfectly well, as Returnal's most exceptional components are also its most fundamental. Both combat and traversal have been polished to a blinding, radiant sheen. It's nearly impossible to find another third-person shooter where the basic act of moving the character feels this good. The run cycle and speed is carefully tuned around every enemy response as each action and reaction churns itself into a strangely intuitive ballet of swarming projectiles. There's plenty of weapons to unlock in Returnal, from your basic sidearm to the carbine to a strange creation that fires pools of toxic goop. It's a testament to the quality of those core building blocks that each new gun feels tight, responsive, and unique. It's It's almost hard to believe that Housemarque have created their first third-person shooter, yet in doing so have catapulted themselves to the top of the heap of action shooter devs alongside studios like Remedy. It feels like they have it all down to a science, which makes it all the more incredible that it's their first attempt at the genre. Most studios, even those with years of experience doing this, never approach this level of inventiveness. Sure, it's easy to find the points of reference. Metroid Prime, H.R. Geiger, Solaris, but the true sign of an inspired work is that ability to seamlessly fuse a pool of interesting influences into something that feels entirely of itself. And Returnal pulls that off in a way that feels almost effortless. Unfortunately, Returnal fails to reach that level of inspired creation with its protagonist Celine's emotional arc. It's refreshing to see a game with a slightly older lead, especially when she's a woman, as we've seen many middle-aged dad stories pop up in gaming, like the recent God of War, but very few stories about women at that same stage in life. But Celine is a character that never quite grapples with the conflicting forces acting upon her character. She feels too detached from the horrors surrounding her, and her surprisingly aloof tone and occasionally awkward writing can make it tough to empathize with her struggle. Much more interesting is the game's real main character, Atropos, the alien world Celine crashes on. In the course of her work as a privateering astronaut employed by the Astra Corporation, she's drawn by a strange signal to the planet's surface. It's a cliched setup that doesn't begin to hint at why it's such a delight to unfurl the planet's mystery, to discover why it traps Celine inside this never-ending cycle of death and rebirth. Discovering the nature of Atropos' life forms and the truth behind its crumbled ancient civilization keeps Returnal's narrative fresh and rewarding. Its enigmatic final arc is sure to prove controversial, but it would be a mistake to tie a story about the unknowable void of existence into a neat little bow. Housemarque respects the audience enough to avoid spoon-fed answers. The narrative's main strength is that it gives the players space to dream, to fill the gaps of Celine's consciousness and memory with their own imagination. It respects the mechanics of mystery. Returnal has also found itself in the position of quietly becoming the most impressive showcase so far for the PlayStation 5's set of hardware features. The haptics add a sense of texture to Atropos' strange grinding machines, while adaptive triggers actually serve an important gameplay function, intuitively switching between weapon fire modes. The swarm of stunning particle effects, always a Housemarque staple, and smooth 60 frames per second refresh highlight the GPU advantage over PS4, while the SSD is showcased by the game's near-instant scene transitions and teleportation between biomes. Even the game made for the specific purpose of showcasing those features, Astra's Playroom, didn't quite go this far in organically incorporating the console's hardware features into its world. One of the game's main weaknesses is the lack of a save system during runs. It's a shocking oversight. If other games within the genre can save the player's progress at each new room, there's no excuse for Housemarque to force players to restart an entire run if they have to stop playing. The PS5's rest mode can mitigate this, but what happens if you lose power, or if you encounter the same bug I came across, where the game closes despite being suspended in rest mode? It's surprising that in a game filled with so many thoughtful design decisions, this bizarrely antiquated save system made it into the final product. The fact that Returnal is visually stunning with superb art design is evident from the first frames of gameplay, but less immediately apparent is the game's spectacular sound design. There were moments when I was confused by a sound I thought I heard from outside my window, only to realize that the game audio's authenticity had tricked me into thinking its chaotic hum and blasts of thunder were real. Like everything else about Returnal, its sound design is both real and surreal, familiar yet alien. Much of the marketing buzz has played up Housemarque's use of 3D audio, and while it's certainly an effective implementation that makes using headphones a treat, the game's well-tuned audio profile make it sound nearly as good on a home theater system or soundbar. Midsommar composer The Haxan Cloak was an inspired choice to compose the game's score, which hums along at a sinister clip in the background, swelling with a sharp synth chord or ambient pad at just the right moment. It's a sublime, atmospheric oral adventure. There's so many other things I could say about Returnal, about the wonderful variety in its biomes, about the shocking story beats that animate its wildest moments, about the way its numerous enemy types arrange into carefully controlled waves, but there's only so much space in a review, unlike the endless glistening void that Atropos draws its mystique from. I have no doubt that many will buy Returnal without understanding how punishing its combat difficulty and permadeath system can be, how relentlessly it demands your full attention, how little respite it offers, but for those players who decide to stick through that baptism of fire, they'll be rewarded by the cascading layers of interlocking systems that make success feel so cathartic. When it clicks, it's unlike anything I've played. When it doesn't, it can be incredibly frustrating, but that frustration is always married to a lesson about how to navigate Atropos' treachery. Every time I play Returnal, it feels like a different game. New elements come into focus. Foreground shifts the scenery, implied themes become explicit. Like Atropos, it never stops changing. I'm giving Returnal a 9 out of 10. Thanks for watching the Spiel Times review of Returnal. If you liked it, please click the thumbs up button underneath the video to give us a like, click the subscribe button, and ring the notification bell to get notified every time we make a new video like this. Your support makes the content we produce at Spiel Times possible, and we're incredibly grateful for every one of you. Feel free to leave your suggestions for future coverage down in the comment section, or get in touch with us on Twitter at Spiel Times, or you can follow me at Caleb Wysor. If you want to follow us on Instagram or Facebook, those links are all down in the description. Thanks for watching.